Buenos dias. Good morning. The program will begin shortly. Before we begin, today's interpreters, Antena Los Angeles, will make a technical announcement. El programa empezará pronto. Antes de empezar, las intérpretes para hoy, Antena Los Angeles, harán un anuncio técnico.
Hola, buenos días.
Hi, good morning.
Mi nombre es Jen Hofer y ella es mi compañera Ana Paula Nogues Mercado y juntas formamos parte de una colectiva que se llama Antena Los Ángeles.
My name is Jen Hofer, and this is my partner, Ana Paula Nogues Mercado, and we are part of a collective named Antena Los Angeles.
Antena Los Ángeles fomenta la justicia del lenguaje en toda la región del sur de California.
Antena Los Angeles fosters language justice in the south of California
mediante la creación de espacios bilingües como este.
through the creation of bilingual spaces such as this one.
El concepto básico de la justicia del lenguaje es la idea que todo mundo tiene el derecho de hablar en él o los idiomas en que nos sentimos más cómodos.
The basic concept of language justice is the idea that we all have the right to speak the language in which we feel most comfortable in.
Lo que estamos haciendo en este momento es interpretación consecutiva. Yo hablo en español y Ana Paula me sigue en inglés.
What we're doing right now is consecutive interpretation. I speak in Spanish, Ana Paula interprets in English.
Pero ahorita vamos a hacer una prueba del equipo de interpretación simultánea.
But right now we're going to test the interpretation equipment with simultaneous interpretation.
Entonces, cualquier persona que no sea bilingüe en inglés y español, ojalá tenga el equipo.
So everyone who's not bilingual in English and in Spanish, we hope that you have the equipment.
Y si no, pueden pasar a la mesa ahí en el lobby para recogerlo.
If not, you can go up the stairs to the table on the lobby to pick it up.
Bye. La creación de espacios bilingües es una responsabilidad compartida entre todo el mundo.
With everyone. Maybe you'll see some gestures doing some gestures. So for example, if you see the interpreters doing this gesture, if you can please repeat it with me, it means that the person who's presenting is presenting very, very fast. And we need them to speak slower, and when everybody repeats it, the person hopefully sees that they need to speak lower and be merciful with the interpreters. The same way, I don't think it's going to happen, but if you see us doing this gesture, if you can please repeat it, it means that we cannot hear you to interpret. We recommend that you keep the equipment on and you just turn the volume on and off based on the language that is being spoken. If something happens with your equipment and it stops working, please don't suffer in silence. Go to the table and very gladly we'll help you. We recognize and honor the presence of other languages that are not English and in Spanish in this space, especially indigenous languages, that given that we are on Tongva land, but the capacity that we have right now is with English and in Spanish. Also, those folks who speak and understand Spanish, that you will hear us using E, for example, bienvenidos a todos. It's not a pronunciation mistake, but an intentional effort to resist the gender binary and create spaces that are more inclusive. This is the ideal place to do it. Please, at the end of the whole day event, please return your equipment before you start socializing so we can pick it up. If you want more information about the creation of bilingual spaces that we do in Antena Los Angeles, you can go to the table and pick up the flyer that we have over there. It's a huge pleasure being here supporting the super valuable work of radical artist women. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone.
Hola, todo
Buenos
el mundo.
dias. Good morning. I'm Annie Philbin. I'm the director of the Hammer Museum, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's symposium, The Political Body of Latina and Latin American Art. This symposium was conceived to further discussion of the ideas and themes explored in Radical Women, Latin American Art, 1960 to 1985, a landmark exhibition, if
I must say so myself, at the Hammer that highlights the artistic contributions of 120 Latina, Chicana, and Latin American women from 25 different countries. Guest curated by Cecilia Fajardo-Hill and Andrea Junta. This historical, yes, let's give them a round of applause. This historical exhibition breaks new grounds in the fields of Latin American, Chicana, and Latina art, and I believe nothing less than rewrites the canons of art history. The exhibition is part of Pacific Standard Time LA, a Getty initiative with nearly 80 arts institutions across Southern California. We are so grateful to the Getty Foundation, and especially Joan Weinstein and her team, for not only providing lead funding for this exhibition, but for uniting the city around this theme. I also want to thank our major funders, Diane and Bruce Halley and Eugenio Lopez, as well as the Hammer's longtime champion, Susan Bay Nimoy, who spearheaded our Friends of Radical Women group. When Cecilia, yes, it's really good. When Cecilia and Andrea approached the Hammer with the idea for Radical Women over 7 years ago, we immediately embraced it. At the Hammer, we believe in the power of art to inspire social change, and we are committed to shining a light on the untold stories of art history. The curators of Radical Women are making visible many artists who have been hidden by a history that has defined quality through a patriarchal lens. These artists questioned those values, retaliated against stereotypes, and subverted existing systems of representation while living in societies that were hostile to radical ideas. Many dared to emancipate the female body in countries with dictatorial, repressive, and violent governments that sought to control, and in some cases imprison and torture female bodies. An exhibition that recuperates history and reclaims the Latin American and Latina female body is incredibly timely. At a moment when the legislation of bodies, whether through reproductive rights or the rights of people to move freely across borders, is under extreme pressure from regimes not only in this country but globally, the exhibition is all the more timely and urgent. In spite of our government's desire to manifest impermeable borders, the exchange of art and ideas across geographic borders is more fluid than ever. Today's symposium is a perfect example of this. We are honored to host a convening of scholars, curators, and artists from many different countries, one that is bilingual in Spanish and English and is being live streamed online for people around the world to view. Thank you to Andrea and Cecilia for your groundbreaking research and for sharing your scholarship with us in such an inspiring way. And thank you to our chief curator, Connie Butler, and also to our head of our academic programs, Theresa Sotto, for your tireless dedication to the project. Thank you to today's panelists for contributing your expertise and insights to this urgent work. And thank you to the audience for furthering this discussion both here and at the Hammer and across the globe. We are very fortunate, before I close, to have many artists in the exhibition here with us today, if they've made it across the city. They've come from countries all over the world, but getting here is not so easy in the morning. But I want to invite all the artists who have made it here this morning to please stand for our recognition of you, if you would, please. We are so honored to have you all. And now I'm going to turn it over to Theresa Sotto. Thank you.
Hi again. My name is Theresa Sotto. I'm Assistant Director of Academic Programs here at the Hammer Museum, and I'm thrilled to be present with all of the radical women and friends here today. I have a few announcements and housekeeping notes to share before we jump into the panels. First of all, I'd like to remind you, if you haven't already, please silence your cell phones and note that taking photographs and video is not permitted in our theater. For those of you who would like to revisit what will surely be a thought-provoking and important and salient program, we are streaming this event live, online in Spanish and English, and the recording will be available on our website. I'm also pleased to share that the Radical Women exhibition is open today until 6 p.m., so I encourage you to explore it during breaks. The exhibition will be on view through December 31st, so if you're too busy speaking with one another during the breaks, you can always come back here, and we will have tours every Saturday at 1 p.m. in both Spanish and English. Also happening today, don't miss artist Monica Mayor's restaging of a 1978 performance, El Tendedero, located upstairs in front of the Hammer store. In this performance, you will receive note cards printed with questions about women's bodies and experiences in public spaces. You will then be invited to hang your written responses on a clothesline, an allusion to everyday female labor. So on to today's program. The structure of today's program is as follows. There are 3 panels, each 1.5 hours each, with 1 moderator and 4 panelists. I will introduce each of the moderators, and then each moderator will introduce the panel. Each of the panelists will give 10-minute presentations, and each panel will end with a Q&A. All of the panelists' impressive biographies are available on the Hammer website, so feel free to check there for additional information about each panelist. Now it is my honor to introduce our first moderator. Cecilia Fajardo-Hill is a British Venezuelan art historian and curator of modern and contemporary art based here in Southern California. As Anne Philbin just said, she is co-curator of Radical Women, as you know, which opened just to the public 3 days ago to critical and popular acclaim. Cecilia is one of the leading curators focused on Latin American artists and their role within a broader global context. She has presented numerous group and solo exhibitions of artists through which she has both promoted emerging artists from Latin America and has contextualized established artists in an international dialogue. Between 2009 and 2012, she was chief curator and vice president of curatorial affairs at the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach, California. Previously, from 2005 to 2008, she was director and chief curator of the Cisneros Fontanals Art Foundation, and between 1997 and 2001, she was general director of Sala Mendoza, a contemporary art exhibition space in Caracas, Venezuela. It is my great, great pleasure to introduce Dr. Cecilia Fajardo-Hill.
Good morning. This is a wonderful occasion. This exhibition took so many years to become a reality. Thank you to the Hammer and the Getty Foundation and the effort of so many people. And if I think of this symposium today, and our session is about the idea of radicality, which is at the kind of the center of the whole exhibition. That's why the title is what it is. And despite the fact that we, Andrea and myself, have always been kind of very embracing and convinced about this term of radical, there is so much that could be said. And also, because the exhibition has 120 artists, 270 works, it's really 120, and each work a possible reading or understanding of what a radical gesture or radical work or radical position may mean. This slide shows a list of artists in the exhibition, that there are 120 artists. I wanted you to notice that the medium is 28% photography, video, so basically half of the show, and then you have mixed media installation. When you look at the way that the exhibition, the work that are included in the show, you can see that the medium is they're not conventional. So the first aspect that is absolutely crucial to this idea of radicality for Andrea and myself is the idea of experimentality. And the experimentality begins by being experimental with the type of materiality and ideas that you use. So photography and video, because were two mediums that weren't really, they didn't have the canonical history that normally art more traditional modes have, it makes a lot of sense that it is such a kind of powerful medium in the exhibition. So I was actually looking yesterday at the different definitions of radicality in order to imagine how we may twist language or may think in relation to art. And the Urban Dictionary that has 100 possible definition from like the streets, it was defining it as something that was incredibly cool. And incredibly cool was the opening exhibition when we had more than 3,000 people, and all the way to the 11 o'clock we had people queuing to get into the galleries. And I thought, yeah, so if something is cool, is that you have a wonderful party and you still want to see this work because it's incredibly engaging and powerful. And they say that it's cool, awesome, wicked, mad. But the main thing is the idea of something extreme that causes or is a great example of great change. And in this exhibition, this idea of radicality, standing up for certain ideas and position. And as you will see, I don't know, I have to move to the next slide, but there are 9 themes in the exhibition that allow somehow to spell out a little bit this possible concept or ways of thinking of the idea of radicality. And for example, self-portrait, which is a very central self-representation as, normally telling yourself how you want to present to the world and the type of kind of complicated and more complex and subjective ways and political ways to present yourself, and breaking stereotypes of ideas of beauty under objectification. That's totally central. Body language, the idea of a body that is connected to nature and the environment in very kind of complex and poetic way, or mapping the body, this idea of redefining, deframing, and thinking of this kind of political body in a position of tension and critiquing stereotypical and kind of ideas of beauty and notions about the female. We've always tended to actually think of radicality in the terms of the male, as experimentality, as kind of cool ideas, but often when we apply this to women, we think that they have working with kitsch, that they're, even when they use unconventional, materials like sewing or something like that, is considered to be something domestic, or particular issues like bodily fluids, which are so taboo, like menstrual blood, which has several works in the exhibition dealing with that. Women were dealing with these things, or repression and psychological thinking, use of language to kind of pervert it and becoming a potential language for erotic ideas, disruptive idea, political expression. So performing the body, experiments where there is a conjunction of performance, theater, dance, particular form of actions and happenings, or you will have power of word, the use of language as a kind of either political or poetic tool, or resistance and fear. There's an enormous chapter in the exhibition about this kind of very complex contestation of real dictatorship or even oppressive situation like you may have had and still have today in a city like Los Angeles with Chicana and Latina people being harassed by the police, the kind of a racist system and so forth. So, and it's wonderful that in the panel today, or for example, the erotic imagination, the political power of the erotic as a space of political contestation and pleasure. This is also another theme in the exhibition, of social places, dealing with social issues, not as an ethnographic or outsider, but dealing with it from the inside as a compassionate and inclusive situation, or the idea of feminism. The whole exhibition for us is a powerfully feminist, but there is also specifically approaches to the idea of the feminist. So I have 5 speakers, which is wonderful, and they're all for different countries. We're going to begin with Patssi Valdez, a Chicana artist that was central to the Grupo Asco, and truly a person that brought into the group this whole idea of masquerading and thinking how the body may work in an urban space, in a political situation, rethinking the idea of glamour and self in a society. Then we have Adriano Pedrosa, that is the director of SMAS, has curated many wonderful exhibitions, Arte Vida or Historias Mestizas, and he's going to talk a little bit from this perspective, this kind of dialogical situation of bringing together women open gender situation. He's dedicating this year to sexuality, he's exploring sexuality in relation to art in his museum. So there is something very interesting for him to bring into the discussion. Then we have Graciela Carnevale, that since the 1960s in Argentina, in the middle of dictatorship, working also with CAD, and as an individual artist created these incredibly powerful actions that went completely beyond the artistic institution to activate a political situation in the street. And then we have Karen Lamassonne, thinking of also this last section of the exhibition about the erotic, the kind of the feminine imagination of the erotic, and I think is very interesting, and she's from Colombia. So we have 4 speakers from very different places in Latin America, and is bringing different approaches, all from my point of view, political and original, but they will give a different perspective of this idea of what may be a concept of the radical. But I feel that, as is in the exhibition, I don't think there will be ever one single definition. And as we go into the session with Andrea and Connie this afternoon about the reinscription of the body and feminism, we will see that all these are different facets of this possible idea of the radical. So I would like to invite the speakers to move to the... So I'm not going to go into detail into the bios of each one of the speakers. There is information on the website. I just wanted you to have an idea of who they are. And the 3 artists in the exhibition, Karen Lamassonne, Patssi, Valdez, and Graciela Carnevale, are all artists that are in the exhibition. And I truly invite you afterward to go and visit the exhibition and find them in the show and see, how they function in the middle of this kind of incredible multi-layered definition of the radical in the concept of the exhibition. Please come to the yeah. Thank you. So the first speaker today is going to be Patssi Valdez, followed by Adriano Pedrosa, Graciela Carnevale, Karen Lamassonne, and then followed by a conversation between us and with you.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts with you on the topic, what does it mean to be a radical woman artist? First of all, here I am at age 2 or 3 in training to be a radical woman artist. I had no idea it was going to take such a strong backbone to survive the career choice I was about to embark on, especially being a woman of color. Before I address the radical woman issue or question, I want to share some political events that took place in my community and the effect they had on me and how they influenced the artwork I was about to make in the future. I grew up in East LA at a time of political upheaval. My first year at Garfield High School was during the walkouts, and my high school was in the middle of a crisis. In 1968, East LA, East Los Angeles, housed a school system entrenched in racism. We had the highest high school dropout rate and the lowest attendance among any ethnic minority group. We walked out for bilingual, bicultural education, Latino teachers and administrators, smaller class sizes, better facilities, and the revision of textbooks to include Mexican American history. I also remember a few incidents in high school that had a major influence on me in the future of my work. My homemaking teacher would make condescending remarks in the classroom. She would say, "You should pay a particular attention in this class because one day you're going to be cooking and cleaning for others." I remember the confusion and anger I felt when she made such remarks. I knew my dreams for the future were not what she implied, and I was determined to prove her wrong. I was also told by my high school counselor that when I graduate, I'd make a good clerical worker. I thought, no, I'm going to be a great artist and make history someday. Comments like these only added fuel to the fire that was already brewing inside of me. As a young woman, I was trying to figure things out. I was dealing with issues of racism, abuse, and machismo. I often felt imprisoned, searching for my voice, which made me angry and frustrated. My ideas and opinions often went unheard, censored, or silenced. I felt exploited, underrepresented, and misrepresented. I was determined to fight for what I believed in. I would dream of one day leaving my repressive neighborhood, breaking free from the confines of the stereotypes that define me as a Latina. My performance years. Since most people were not interested in what I had to say, I came up with a strategy. I decided to reinvent myself. I began to imagine and experiment. I realized that I had to appear larger than life to get your attention. Once I had your attention, I could then get you to listen to me and get my point across. I began creating hyperreal images of myself, creating different personas. My way out. I felt an urgency to express, address, and challenge the injustices, prejudice, and outmoded depictions of Latinas. When I gazed into the camera, I imagined the world as my audience, daring you to challenge me. One of my main objectives in my performance work was to break with convention, shattering the stereotypes, to redefine the portrayal of Latinas and present an empowered Latina, defiant, glamorous, a protagonist in control of her own destiny. When you ask me, what does it mean to be a radical woman? A radical woman artist, in my opinion, is an artist who voices her opinion and takes drastic or extreme measures to fundamentally address, challenge, and change circumstances and conditions in a system she finds oppressive, unjust, and unfair, be it in her home, community, or culture.
Excuse me, I'm going to adjust your microphone. I'm going to lower it a little bit. Thank you.
Through art, I found my voice and the power and freedom to express myself without hindrance or restraint. So really, coming from an artist's point of view, I just needed to share my personal experience in relation to the question about being a radical woman artist. Thank you.
Adriano Pedrosa is our second speaker.
Pedrosa es nuestro siguiente orador.
Thank you, Cecilia, for the invitation. Thank you all here, the Hammer, Connie Butler, and Andrea Junta, and Anne Philbin. I feel a bit uncomfortable with the question, I should say. Very humbly, as I am not an artist, I'm not a woman, and perhaps not even radical. So I wouldn't like to speak for that, but I would then try to speak a little bit about how in this one particular exhibition that Cecilia called attention to, Arte Vida, how we were working with radical women artists. So these are quite exciting times for those working on 20th century art history, be it in academia, in art writing, in the museum, or in exhibitions, as well as in galleries. There is a widespread and genuine interest in rethinking and rediscovering art and its histories in the 20th century, taking into consideration the work that was not produced by the white, male, educated Euro-American artists. Here, slowly, wow. Right, okay, no, that's fine. I just have too much to read, but I'll try to skip through. Here today, we are considering radical women artists from Latin America, yet we could speak also about artists from Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America of both or all genders. The territory is quite vast. It is truly a new frontier, if you think about it, in terms of research, writing, and curatorial practice. In fact, it can be quite paralyzing as well, as increasingly all the knowledges that had been taught in so many art history classes around the traditional narratives of modernism in the 20th century were in fact revealed to be biased, incomplete, insufficient, if not sexist, racist. Art history as we knew it, with all its movements, its antecedents and predecessors, its schema of vectors to allude to the Alfred Barr diagram, all this was a small and slanted fragment of a much greater, possibly unattainable whole. In this sense, it has become urgent to research and exhibit art that speaks about other realities, other contexts, other cultures, other life experiences, visions of the world, and those other than our white, male-educated Euro-American artists. Much of this interest, as we know, is thus expressed in the work of women artists, but also in the work of artists of color, artists working outside Euro-America, self-taught artists or outsider artists, as well as indigenous artists, Native American artists, First Nation artists, Aboriginal artists, Amerindian artists, even in the US. We could frame this interest in new narratives as a decolonization of art and its histories. There are several understandings around this, and this is quite a contested discussion, yet in simple terms, decolonization can be understood as challenging the established hierarchies, orders, geographies, territories, and more significantly, challenging the dominance of a certain group of figures, narratives, or discourses within an established discipline or field. Cecilia Fajardo-Hill, in her catalogue essay of radical women, states quite generously that Arte Vida, the exhibition that I organized with Rodrigo Moura in Rio in 2014, is perhaps, quote, the most ambitious international exhibition to date to propose an open and complex dialogue between Brazilian... Sorry, I'm... Okay. Right, right. Thank you. I keep looking, but I guess... so this is, quoting her again, is the most ambitious international exhibition to date to propose an open and complex dialogue between Brazilian, Latin American, European, including Eastern European and North American artists, in which women artists were seemingly given a role in prominence to that of her male counterparts. The show had a similar historical framework of radical women from the late 50s through the early 80s, thus overlapping with the dictatorship period in Brazil. There are about 107 artists in the show, 53 of them are women, many of them are here in the exhibition as well. However, we also attempted to include artists beyond Latin America, beyond Europe. Although they came in a smaller number, we had the presence of Japanese artists such as Tanaka and Yamazaki, Turkish artists Kara Mustafa and Nui Alter, the Iranian Munir Sharoudi, the Indian Nazreen Mohammed, and the South African Sue Williamson, among others. So the question which Arte Vida tried to answer could be framed like this. After pioneering exhibitions such as WAC in 2007 and Radical Women from Latin America 10 years later, what could be the next possible steps to be taken in terms of research and curatorial practice in order to continue to support these radical women artists. There are a number of possibilities, and one task is to give sustained individual visibility to these artists through research, publications, solo exhibitions, as well as through museum acquisitions and collection display. I do want to underline collection display because it's quite remarkable to see how so many artists from the 60s, from the 70s, from this generation are in fact in collections of museums. They're actually in deep storage, and their work don't never really see the light of day. In terms of unfolding into monographic exhibitions, we see already here the example of Maiolino, the Brazilian artist who's here, also having a solo show at MoCA right now. We see a number of institutions in Europe and in the United States working around that. Sheena Wagstaff at the Metropolitan Museum has been doing important work, dedicating solo shows, for example, to Nazreen Mohammed, the Indian artist, and Lígia Papi, the Brazilian. The Guggenheim also to Monir Charoudi recently. But I feel perhaps State Modern is the one that's doing the more ambitious pioneering work, with artists such as dedicating solo shows to artists such as Amrita Shergill from India, Salwa Shuker from Lebanon, the Turkish Farenisa Zaid, who is currently on view. That might be difficult, no? Farenisa Zaid from Turkey, preparing one now on Russian artist Natalia Goncharova. And alongside that, they also doing the shows on Gauguin, on Giacometti, Picasso, Modigliani, among others. The other possibility in terms of unfolding, unpacking, or advancing on the work that surveys such as Radical Women and WAC have pioneered would be to envision new narratives and articulations for the art of the 20th century, or the 60s through 80s, which is the period that we're talking about, with women artists in dialogue not only with women from all over the world, but also with other artists from Latin America, from Africa, Middle East, and Asia. In a way, the challenge to unfold and unpack shows such as WAC and Radical Women is to overcome the traditional framework of the survey itself upon which these shows are based. In search for new articulations, themes, motifs, we often need to leave aside or forget the male artists that were protagonists in the traditional canonical narratives. This is what we attempted to do in Arte Vida. I'll skip a little bit so I can speak more slowly. The exhibition, Arte Vida then, organized in Rio in 2014, had 4 venues and 4 sections. Arte Vida Corpo, Body, at Casa França Brasil, Arte Vida Política, Politics, at Museu de Arte Moderna do Rio de Janeiro, Arte Vida Arquivo, Archive, where Graciela in fact took part at the Biblioteca, and Arte Vida Park at the Parque Lage. I will show 2 sections of Arte Vida Body as examples on how we attempted to articulate that. The first section, again, Arte Vida Body, included works that somehow utilized the line as a thread or as a negative space, and the weave as an alternative to the grid. The grid, as we know it, is modern, 20th century, machinic, serialized, geometric, rational, abstract, cold, and of course European. And the weave, on the other hand, is ancient, traditional, artisanal, handmade, singular, figurative, warm, crossing many cultures and periods. So this is the installation shot. And then I have a few details of images here, for example, of works that were in that show. Ana Maria Maiolino, Annegret Soltau and the Ligia Clark work. And again here, on your left, upper left, Jetta Bratescu, below her Marisa Merz and Alejandro Puente. The other section that I wanted to present very briefly again, again in the section devoted to Arte Vida Corpo, is a subsection that again unfolds the idea of the organic line, but was devoted to using the Bishu of Ligia Clark, the famous sculpture of articulated metal and hinges that disrupt traditional constructivist, geometric, stable, and finalized notion of sculptures. In this section, then, we included works by Ligia Clark, as well as Charlotte Posenensky, Dora Mauer from Hungary. Charlotte Posenensky is a German artist. Munir Sharudi, again, is an Iranian artist. Here on the right-hand side, works by Eduard Krasinski. The large metal sculptures are by Charlotte Posenensky. Another image where you see another Iranian Bishu by Moshen Vasily Moghadam. To the right of it is a work by Matthias Goeritz, and then to the left, in the stand, a small Bishu as well. Works by Lebanese artist Saloua Chouker, next to a Bishu of Ligia Clark as well. And finally, a work by Rashid Areen, also an Indian artist living in Britain. No? Thank you very much.
So our third speaker is Graciela Carnevale.
Buenos días a todos y muchas gracias.
And thank you so much for all you did to make this day possible, especially Cecilia and Andrea. The symposium is conceived as a discussion space about the different meanings and of radicality in the context of the exhibition Radical Women from 1960 to 85, and takes the concept of political body as an axis. What does it mean or meant to be a radical woman artist in the 60s? What does her singularity defines? What was that consisted of? There are works, how and where is it manifested in the politicity of bodies? What avenues do we make happen? What ruptures do we provoke? What new perceptions do we make possible? What do we transform? I will try to reflect from my own practice, from works and actions from the 60s that in a way incorporate and go deeper in this concept in a tangential way. The thing that we name as radical is different based on circumstances and historical moments. The actions lose efficacy based on the context and based on the protection by the system. What's necessary to recreate continuously the instruments and tools that we use. In Rosario in the 60s, we wouldn't talk about feminism or radical women. We would name ourselves as artistas de vanguardia, and our radicality was manifested in our questioning of the status quo, in the experimental attitude in our productions, and in our practices, in the conflicts based on the conflict, social conflicts as ways of intervening in reality. We pretend that our actions would be part of a revolutionary process of change. Our condition as women was not a topic on discussion or a flag or struggle within the group. The gender issue was not a problem in our realm of questioning in that moment. Maybe because some other priorities were actually taking place in the local scene and the gender discourse was not really corresponding to our immediate reality. However, our questioning, feminist questioning, were ours. The problematic of gender was based on our search. We were part of a class that was actually, we were reflecting of our need, economical need, and our just vital need as a way of self-realization. We occupied other places. There was not a response that would refer to the empty spaces that we were living, so we felt trapped in our own desire and desire of equality and equality of rights. We went outside to work, but we were not able to delegate our all responsibilities and tasks. We had to keep doing that, the domestic tasks and childbearing. The change in the roles came afterwards. As women, we were in conflict with double in a space of apparently being freedom and the ties of the previous system. So the images, let me show the images. We challenged canonic concepts in art and also in the social roles, and we try to subvert the patriarchal structure that was determining an archetype, ideological archetype, and culture for men and women. This meant several times not accepting behaviors, certain conduct, certain sensitivity, certain cliches and stereotypes of femininity. Also changing parameters for the males. We wanted to change from our artistic practices, really bringing the artistic conception, the work, and how to be a political person. In the 60s and 70s in Argentina, we lived under dictatorial regimes. We imposed a repressive normative for the state. The system oppression was acting upon our bodies, impacting our individual freedoms and the most intimate spaces for the subjects. We were trying to normalize aspects so personal as the length of our hair or using the beard, using miniskirt, or try to work in pants in schools or public schools or offices. The model of woman and a wife, it was based on this religious and patriarchal structures. The extermination and violenting of bodies and forced this desperation of...
We worked from an idea of non-centrality, an alternativity in nothingness, to a collective space, the rejection of artistic autonomy and a critical recognition cited in constant becoming as against singular thought modes. In a context of violence and military dictatorship with a certain kind of production valued, we were able to develop new myths in the midst of that culture. We had moments, movements, and manifestations against what was established to be able to develop alternative forms to military collusion, different forms and different practice. This is how we develop very diverse experiences of creating counter-information, research through artistic methods, the appropriation of the street and other space through unions and other kinds of groups, use of film and other materials that were actually quite far from normative artistic practice, and using our bodies. Experiences of resistance, empowerment, and autonomy, where the concept of art and life became central. The coup d'etat of Pinochet in Chile and other coups in Latin America were led to revolutionary experiences based in ideas around the peaceful taking of power. Modes of action and language and art and politics were developed against and rejecting patriarchal and traditional ideas. New processes of subjectivity were developed, new ways of becoming visible and underscoring the experiences of individual people and bodies. These practices don't only lead to the dematerialization of objects, but also an underscoring of perception, of consciousness taking, and the appearance of improvised formats of adapting new kinds of legibility that were necessary to be built at that time. Being a radical artist then meant becoming committed to profound changes in our society, to work against authoritarian and dictatorial regimes. Authoritarian and dictatorial and repressive regimes. It was a commitment to work against the existing structures of power. It was a battle, a fight against different forms of repression and for new forms of life. Conceptual practices and experimental practices, we might think of them as expressions of a new subjectivity. They worked against the universality of a colonialist Western canon. The challenge consisted of putting into praxis inclusive and newly constitutive practices from where we might be able to produce new forms of knowledge and new values and new forms of articulation between artistic practice in a socio-political context. So against a hegemony of an asphyxiating social structure, our creation of autonomous spaces and critical practices in dialogue with other practices, understanding them of forms of action to subvert the established order. We decided to work at the margins of the experimental in new forms that would be susceptible to our collective endeavors to work for subjective emancipation. In our societies, culture is constituted in a space of normalization of the body and normalization of subjectivity, where norms and values are produced through a patriarchal order and the means of capitalist production. But also, artists are able to put new methodologies into practice and create alternatives. We resisted the separation between discipline, the separations between art practice and political practice, but also the vertical relationships or hierarchical relationships of education and knowledge production. These processes of collective invention allowed us to move outside the academic framework and create new forms of art making. All of these issues were a symptom of a situation of change in our society. They demanded a rearrangement of our positionings, our relationships, using new guidelines that might produce profound changes in society and in our subjectivities. Sorry, but I forgot all about the images. Thank you very much.
Our last speaker for the first panel, Karen Lamassonne. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Cecilia, Fajardo, and Andrea Junta for their vision, their courage, and their energy to create this show. And, of course, the Arm & Hammer Museum, and everyone else who put together this event, and for all of you and the radical women. Life is a trip on which we never really know where we are headed. We become who we are without really knowing or planning our persona. My life is filled with many influences and places. My father is Argentine and my mother is Colombian. I was born in New York, but spent my early childhood in Colombia. Living in the tropics as a young child really framed my vision to be more savage and exuberant than if I had just known the beaches of Long Island, New York. Nature has always been my guiding force, making me a passionate and visceral being. My fondest memories are in the tropics with the animals, the insects, the smell of the wood-burning fire, and my grandmother's arepas with chocolate. I come from a very large family of 7 children, a gang of sorts. There was never a dull moment at home, and life was filled with humor and many games. The Latino family concept is very different than the US family. We still remain very tightly knitted together, constantly celebrating life's ups and downs, traveling and supporting each other. My family moved back to New York in the early 60s. I remember that it was dark. It was winter, and it seemed probably darker to me because I was coming from the tropical light of Colombia. I was put in a Catholic school with Dominican nuns where I developed a very rebellious vein towards the church and uniforms. I had to maneuver all of my raw memories from the tropics to a very structured, cold environment in New York where I could do nothing right. I had to adapt to a lot of things, namely speaking the language. Having a second language was seen as more of a major defect than an advantage during the 60s. And since English was not my native tongue, I was made aware of it. I only found solace at home with my siblings or outside in the garden in the earth. I always felt like a stranger, but with time and acceptance, I found myself fitting in. While in school, my safe haven was always the art class. Art was how I expressed myself best and received really good grades. My artistic creativity became my identity long before I ever graduated from high school. I did not attend a university. It was not an option. At a public high school in the US, I started having a life. Fashion became an expression. Free love was the thing, and I joined in. Soon I was experimenting with drugs. I was discovering and exploring my sexuality at a time when it was becoming more accepted in society. At least that was my perception. It all felt so natural. I feel very grateful that I had these experiences as a young woman. I have never felt ashamed of my body. All of this free love reality clashed with my strict Latino upbringing. Mother would hide certain things from my father, which in the end only really feeds machismo. With the Vietnam War, I learned about protests and how violence weakens the soul. I was becoming a radical woman without willing it, and it felt right. Growing up as a Latin American female in the US during the 60s really defined me. When I moved back to Colombia in the 70s, I felt like I was going backwards in time. I had very liberal ideas regarding everyday situations, and I was a sexually active woman. I was 18. I made interesting life choices because they involved risks, adventure, and traveling. I hitchhiked with my new Colombian friends for 5 months all over South America. I began my artistic production and exhibited in Bogota and Cali. I got my own place in Bogota, And from then on, I was determined to live off of my artwork. Painting became a channel to express everything in me, my sexual being. My work involved self-portraits using a mirror where I was usually naked. I took care to frame a composition that would satisfy me in a very sensual way. Being a single female living on her own was not usual. So for me to paint myself in my intimate surroundings felt very safe. My work was for myself, not to please anyone. I also would portrait everyday life objects and things and find sensuality and a lot of personality in those inanimate objects. There's nothing like being on your own. Whatever turned me on gave me the satisfaction, and my friends accepted my work and me. Deep inside, I felt that my nakedness was my strength. I believed in my feminine power, and being a woman was my power, my defense, and a way of surviving and existing in a machista society. My expression was never really thinking as a feminist or a transgressor. I was out of touch with this movement, having moved away from the US. I was a product of my environment, my influences, and my experience growing up at a specific time. I had always felt like a stranger when in the US, and upon returning to Colombia, I discovered I was getting labeled as the New York artist. My work was different. I began traveling and exhibiting in different cities in Colombia and made many great friends in the art world. I exhibited in Germany, representing Colombia, with 4 other Colombian women. I lived in Paris for a year, producing more work and traveling with my Caleño friends, acquiring new influences. In 1979, I showed a series of watercolors with the theme of bathrooms, 2 of which are on display here in Radical Women. The Cali show, which was held at the Executives Club in a multi-purpose room, was taken down on the 3rd day due to a man giving a conference that could not continue with these obscenities on the walls. I guess he got very distracted. The show was not put back up. I was glad, actually, that something had happened and that it had not gone unnoticed. The bathroom series was then exhibited in Bogota and Medellin. It was received better than in Cali. People wanted to see the censored show. My work became more erotic, where nudity and sex were protagonists. With my bathrooms, I moved to Cali in 1980 and joined the Grupo de Cali, a film and artist group that collaborated together in many mediums. I worked especially very closely with Luis Ospina, learning the many different aspects to make a film. These years were very productive as I was involved in film, creating theatrical sets and costume design, graphics, music, painting, and photography. After working on several feature films in Cali, we began to use the video as a tool during rehearsals and the shooting of the films. We were filming in 35 millimeters at that time. Video was a new means of expression. So I borrowed the video camera for a few days and recorded my delicate secrets. My friends helped me in acting, camera, and editing. This video was presented in the Salón Atenas in the museum in the Mambo. I remember Maria Velia Marmolejo. She also participated in that salon, and I admired her courage. Upon leaving Bogota to return to Cali, I was very pleased to have had that opportunity to show the video along with some of my drawings of my cinematographic experience. The second video, Noise, which is shown here at Radical Women, was created when I found myself spending a long winter in Manhattan. This time I worked by myself, setting up the camera on a tripod. It is autobiographical about being in New York alone. My original idea for the installation was to create an atmosphere as one sees in the video of a dark room with the only light coming from the multiple monitors. I imagined a room with a lot of movement created by the video light flickering on the absorbent paper of many paintings. I had never shown this installation as it has been done here in Radical Women more than 30 years later. It made me very happy when my proposal was granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We actually made it on time, which is great. Well, we can talk until. So anyway, it was. It's very interesting to hear all these different perspectives because they touch on different notions of the idea of the radical or radical women or radicality as concepts. And so in the case of Karen, who just spoke now, the idea of sexuality, the power of the erotic as a kind of a form of empowerment. So there is a really wonderful Brazilian artist who is in the erotic session called Teresina Soares, who also believes that the idea of this sexuality and sexual empowerment and pleasure requires social and political freedom. And I think is very much something that is kind of reflected in Karen's work, in some of the works in the exhibition. And I think it's a absolutely key concept within the idea of radicality, because especially women throughout history, and especially history of art and as a society, have, you know, the role that they have occupied is a role of submission and a role of objectified women. So I think Karen's work goes completely against this notion that is for someone, it's a form of empowerment for you, as a form of definition. And also Graciela Carnevale's collective work with CADA, where there is very, very, very strong engagement, political engagement with a society, with truly attempting to transform it and being in the middle of a dictatorship and totally going beyond the idea of art that is simply confined to the artistic institution. Really this kind of, and is, I think, another very powerful idea, which is when art does not rely on the institution and the art system, the art market. That is a very, actually an element of it that is completely contested in the work, because it becomes deactivated and neutralized. And I think a lot of the notion of radicality in art from the 1960s is also this idea that art can really intervene and have a transformative role in art. And institutions are constantly kind of playing this kind of dialogical situation. They're trying to include them, and there is a neutralizing effect, and artists continue to kind of struggle in this sense. That, you know, for us today is a challenge, you know, so many years later, to give some sort of sense of this power. Then Patssi Valdez, again, creating this work with the body so much in the center of it, you know, body photography, this kind of persona that is reinvented, is protest this kind of stereotypical and oppressed role that society gives to them in this context of oppression of Chicana and Latino people in Los Angeles, in California, and generally in the States, which we also are seeing again today, you know, coming back with a vengeance in a kind of really negative way. And Adriano's presentation with Arte Vida, as you saw some of the images, the exhibition is truly formidable with all these different themes and imploding notions, even, you know, when you think of geometry or something like drawing of the line as possible liberating notion of this idea of connection between art and life, and kind of taking them out of this kind of neutralizing context where we normally have been trained and put, you know, this kind of modern almost jail that kind of overrides everything. So I would like to ask like a question to Adriano first, because it's a kind of an institutional to move on into the art. Is you were talking about kind of moving away from this idea of the survey, this idea. So I'm interested in exploring a little bit more, and you were talking about this kind of more conversational. So not only moving away from the idea of survey, but also the idea of, let's say, having an exhibition like Radical Women, which is about women, not WAC, which is about women. So.
Yeah, no, what I meant is that after the survey, what would be the next step, no? So after this, after WAC, and after this, which is an extremely relevant exhibition, already indeed a landmark exhibition, how can you unfold that in terms of research and exhibitions and curatorial practice? So not moving away, because I think it can't be repeated. Of course, the exhibition can travel, but I think the next steps, perhaps, looking at Radical Women and looking at WAC, and in fact, when we were doing Arte Vida, we were looking at WAC, and we knew that we had spoken about your project, so we knew that your project was happening. So after these large-scale surveys of Latin American or global women like WAC was, what would be the next step? No, that's in that sense we were thinking. So I think one step is definitely to dedicate more focused monographic publications, research, exhibitions on these 100 artists here. No, so Maiolino is having it. For example, we worked with Wanda Pimentel and Terezinha Soares, who are also here. We worked with them in 2014. Now in 2017, we're dedicating solo shows to these artists. So this is one way, is let's say, I would see it in that way, focusing on individual monographic studies. And the other way is to actually make larger articulations. I think that's what we try to do with Arte Vida, where women artists play a major role, significant role, central role, in articulating different groups of artists from different regions or different generations. No?
Yeah, that makes sense. And talking about this question, I would like to ask you as an artist, because I know that has been, I mean, Patssi was talking about this idea of being not only underrepresented, but misrepresented. And I know, there is so many issues that have to do with the stereotype of being a woman artist, what kind of framework people put on you, what kind of label you have, how the kind of ethnicity takes a role. So I'm interested in how do you imagine, how do you envision, what are the kind of the structure? And this is a question for the three of you in terms of how you view yourself, because you're also active artists today, and how this kind of relation between the past and the present, and thinking of the future. Because for us as curator and institution, we are truly interested in this idea how artists themselves feel and may function. You have this, like Graciela, that you're contesting completely the idea of the institutionality. In the case of Patssi, she feels it's been underrepresented and misrepresented, and in your case, you've been censored. Of course, we are in a completely different moment in time, but we're knowing that the body's been censored. We have a situation in Brazil now where is it Adriano Pedrosa?
Yeah, an exhibition, queer museum, an exhibition was closed down in Porto Alegre in the south of Brazil. And one of the key sort of works were by Adriana Varejão.
And it contained nudity, I think. That was the
nudity, zoophilia, and sex, pedophilia, scenes of pedophilia as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we are in a moment where there is kind of a recognition, but also we are in a moment where there is a tendency to being conservative, censorship, controlling the body again. So what are from your perspective and the institutional perspective, what will be the kind of the challenge, that the way that we could, you envision that this may come?
Is this on? Yes. Well, in my personal case, I feel very fortunate because in Colombia for the past year, I have been involved in different shows where my work from the past, from this time, has been shown. Some of the slides that I showed today of the paintings especially. And I feel that, well, in Cali, for instance, the Museo La Tertulia, the Museum of Modern Art there, they are doing a lot of historical revisions right now, and they have brought back like Fernel Franco's photography, Ever Astudillo, and I am fortunate right now that curator Andres Matute, he curated this show where they have my works from the 70s and the 80s, and is a very sensual, there's a lot of sexuality in my show. And when I saw it getting put up, I was very surprised because I would see all of this on the walls, you know, and it just really, it dawned on me that it was all my work. And then, you know, I was concerned, or there were people that were concerned that there's a lot of schools that come to this show. And I was thinking because my work has been censored before, I actually thought, I wonder if the show will get shut down. But no, it's been really actually very welcomed. And I was very surprised also in the opening how many young people were at the show, you know. And so I think that there is an interest right now for a lot of all this past and everything that we as women have gone through, and especially from the young people, and I think a lot of institutions also, I see that there is an interest, you know. I see, that's my personal experience.
I think, yo creo que,
I think that
bueno, lo voy a contestar bien a nivel personal.
I'm going to use a personal anecdote as my response.
Los tiempos van cambiando y los contextos
Times are changing and the contexts are changing so quickly. In an ongoing way, continually, we need to think and recite ourselves, resituate ourselves, and also we need to be involved in searches for new languages, new forms, new spaces also, as well. At this moment, I think that it's very important, and we've been working more and more to create encounters where listening is possible and where we can be heard and we can listen. And above all, to be able to amplify and broaden the vision of what artistic production and artistic work might be. Not just, we might say, within art spaces, but also to be able to work interdisciplinarily or transdisciplinarily. We also think a lot about deterritorialization in our work, and deterritorialization of art in search of new contexts, new spaces that will be less problematic and that will bring us together or will allow us to view the problematics or the problems that we are experiencing today.
Could you pose the question again?
So basically, because the original question I posed to Adriano about what, you know, how can we frame, how can we present, can we activate this idea of radicality into the future? How would it be for you, the way that you would like it to be? Because, you know, in your case, you talked about invisibility and misrepresentation, which we know it is a big problem, and is a problem about gender, and is a problem about race, and is a problem.
Well, you know, I was a photographer for 10 years, and one of my goals was to document my culture. And I have a whole body of work that's never been seen before. And I wanted to document the beauty and diversity of my culture. And my goal someday, I hope it happens before I'm no longer on this planet, is to exhibit those 10 years of my photography that have never really been seen before. I mean, really, that's all I can say for now.
Okay. Can I ask a question? Sure. Maybe a provocation a little bit, perhaps. I was trying to think of this with you, the notion of radicality, which seems to relate more to politics or the body or the space around us or around the radical women. And on the other hand, it does not seem to relate so much to sort of formal issues, let's say. And in that sense, I was thinking of an artist who's a key artist in Brazil in that period that you were looking at, Mira Schendel, which is not in your exhibition, and it was not in our exhibition either. She has her radicality, but perhaps more linguistic, formal terms. I wonder how you feel about this.
Well, the thing is, when we were started to do this project, which we also the chronological frame was larger. It started in the 40s. After 2 years of research, we had 400 artists. It was an encyclopedic show. Probably there is so many different sensibilities and challenges and important ideas during this period of times. And so we decided to kind of stay a little bit more away from, first of all, expression of that are more related to modernism, and also as we looked at the group of artists that we have been researching after we decided that we wanted to focus on the idea of the experiments in a period of time that are for us defining in how we understand contemporary art today. So what happens is that what we found again and again and again, this idea of this kind of body that was in the center of the work. We have cases, I don't know, like for example, there is a piece in the exhibition called Silencio, Silence by Margarita Paxa. It's just a plexi box, it's completely transparent and minimal, and it's expression about silence, emptiness, zero ground in a time of a dictatorship. So it's basically fundamentally an abstract piece, but it refers in a very profound way to a kind of a context which is kind of existing from a body. In the case of Mira Schendel, it's the work is absolutely wonderful, and I could think of probably 20 or 30 artists that should be in the exhibition. In the case of Venezuela, someone like Gego, that completely transformed this idea of space and how the body can inhabit the space through this grid that becomes completely organic. So there are all these other things, but in the end, even with this focus of this idea of the political body, the idea is a political body that acts in space and occupies the space. So it meant that some artists that are absolutely fundamental are left out. So it's just one specific reading. And I think, the idea that radicality cannot be classified, I will consider 100% that Mira Schendel was one of them. But it doesn't go through this idea of the political body, which is the kind of the focus of our exhibition. But again, thinking of this idea of radicality is just so expansive that, it can be thought in many different ways. So, I don't know if we have any questions inside ourselves. We thought of having a very short conversation of 15 minutes so that we have time to have a conversation with you. And again, I really invite you to see the exhibition for the ones of you that have not seen it, because these are just kind of beginning of ideas of what this radicality, each one of the artists in the show that would have been asked, I would have told you one different version of it. But, the way I've seen it, especially through this kind of conversation today and to Adriano's exhibition, is that this kind of incredibly powerful political, aesthetic kind of investment in the expression of art as a way of occupying and existing in a society and also in the art system. So I would like to open the conversation to the audience if you have any questions. Otherwise, we may continue talking amongst ourselves. But it's important to hear you. And someone on the back, in the center, in the back.
Please hold for
There's
the
a microphone that is coming to you.
Muchas gracias. Mi pregunta es
My
para
question is for Graciela Carnevale. I'm interested if you could talk a little bit more about the relationship between radicality and violence, because those are words that are repeated in your work, like el asalto, el secuestro, and I'm interested that could be also mention some resonances with other aesthetics, the aesthetic of hungerness or violence of Claudio Rocha, and how this creates a tension between policy, body, aesthetics. And something else for Cecilia, if you could talk about the obstacles that you had for this show. I imagine that not all women who were invited accepted the proposal. So I would be interested in having a list of the ones who didn't accept. If not a list, just some questions that could come from that. So I think that what you're asking in terms of the violence, even the concept of violence, I think we were living in a government, in a military government, very repressive government, and that created censorship. The experience of violence, we felt it in our bodies every day. So in a certain way, with our group, especially through in '68, through the different conversations that we had every day, and the attempts to see where could we locate ourselves and find the contradictions of that context. What was that exercising against based in the productions that we were creating or the place of the artist in society? That made us to think about the violence also as material, as a production material to work from within the language of art. And in a certain way, we took, in a conscious or unconscious way, different elements from the struggle, the everyday struggle of that moment. For example, strategies that were more from different political groups, especially, I think also you were talking about using language, asalto, assault, or with the case of like imprisonment, encierro. I provoked a violence on the audience, but I first had to create a violence towards myself, exercise violence towards myself, to be able to exercise as a exercising someone who would exercise violence. But it was a sensation of like we needed to provoke, and provoke in a very intense way to achieve reactions or awareness raising based on what was happening. And we were thinking in the possibility of a revolutionary change, and that was pretty possible. So that need of also ourselves act to be able to achieve that change. We could not think about just being passive or just staying in the specifics of art, but exactly what we were trying to do is to unleash those concepts and link them to everyday life. We were living an experience, a life as an aesthetic experience at that time. I don't know if I'm responding.
Okay. The second question was about the difficulties in terms of the proposal of the exhibition. Some of the artists in the exhibition, such as Monica Meyer, that has been close to us from the very beginning, know a little bit the story of María Belén Marmolejo, of the project. It took very long, not only because it's a project that needed a lot of research, but also because it had, at the beginning, the first 3-4 years, a lot of the people that we approached and also institutions considered this not to be a relevant or needed project. They considered even something which is quite absurd, the idea that we were already now in the era of the queer, so women were not relevant as subject. And whereas, several pieces in the exhibition do actually deal with this aspect, which is an incredibly important one. And also there is the idea that everything that relates to women is related to an idea of feminism, which is a truly crucial idea, but is sometimes used as a label to discard the possible value of art, or is the need to be actually considered to be as an important experimental and valid art form. And also the idea that already sufficient women were present, and also the very idea that whatever has been invisible until now, because it's not relevant, this idea that you have your linear career, linear time, if by the age of 20, 30 or 40 you're not present, and if this has been erased from the memories because it never really existed. So I guess the radicality of this has been that Andrea and myself have been incredibly stubborn, and then so many people and women, and I think I call it stubborn in the best sense of the way, and Philbin, that had the courage to decide to do it, the director of the institutions in the Birmingham, and working with Connie Butler, who did 10 years ago WAC. So in the end, it really, I think it takes, it really, you need to take almost a non-institutional attitude for something like this to happen. So I really feel that an exhibition like this in the end takes place because the institution goes over the kind of the fundamental frame to say that, you know, it kind of embraces something like this. So I think, yes, but I think this is about creating visibility. And, you know, Andrea and myself, we are art historians, so we wanted to write a chapter and say these women have contributed to the languages of contemporary art. They've done it through being experimental and using their bodies and having the political, you know, body in the center of it. And that whole idea now is understood. It wasn't really understood at the beginning. And some artists, yes, said no. And for very sad reasons, like, I don't want to be bunched up with a woman, and also because of fear of being stereotyped, because I had already been stereotyped. But also, you know, this sense that, you know, maybe I'm already too famous, and usually the artists are too recognized to feel that they can be part of this. Because, you know, the exhibition includes very well-known artists like, I don't know, Ligia Clark, Marta Minuhin, and some others who really are not. So breaking the idea of a hierarchy for some artists who are already in a certain position is not the case. So that is possibly a patriarchal position. I won't say the names, but it did happen.
Please wait for the microphone.
Oh, thank you. I liked very much what Graciela talked about in the sense of not a question of a point of view, but being a Brazilian artist in Rio or in some, at the 60s and the 70s and on up to now, and that she talked about something that I keep saying also, in the sense of the woman power, the idea of the feminine and things. Sometimes I say, when I declare that we didn't have time, I mean, not time that I couldn't talk, but we didn't have time on that time in the core of the 60s to the 70s when the dictatorship started in 64 to deal with the idea of the feminine. Also, although I am a woman and I worked, I mean, as a woman, but in the sense that the time was all, let's say, pushed into dealing with main things like the boycott that we made, that we were meeting all the time, like these meetings she was showing, to decide something that was like, I say after those years, I said it was a shot on your own foot. The artists that declared that they are going to make a boycott on the biennial, mainly the biennial, the international. It was the only way that we artists, women or men, that were taking part in the biennial, like me in the whole 60s, could put our work to be seen internationally by the people that would be coming to visit. But the time, the function of artists, I felt that way, I feel from that time, was really dedicated or put in mind on putting up these main political decisions, you know, that were really even against ourselves, like making this boycott, which was the only way to show our work internationally on that time. Yeah? It was in 68, the boycott. So it meant that there was a biennial of 67 in which I took part. And 68 was because of the act, the institutional act, the number 5, that became very violent against not artists especially, but about the people or their reivindications and things like that. And just what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense what you say, and in effect, that's why the exhibition does not consider the gender issue the only issue in the exhibition. There is all these other political or other approaches to art in this period of time. Yeah, there is a question in the back there. In the center, another one over here, and another one on this side. Okay, we have 3 questions.
I really found the comment about the weave as opposed to the grid wonderful. And I'm wondering from whether it's artist or curator, it strikes me that my observation is in the programming, in your relationships with each other, that the weave is highly present. But at the end of the day, you're left with putting work on floor or walls or space that looks more like a grid. And whether it's in the catalog or the museum walls, just how you bring the radicality to the presentation and installations to make it a little bit more of a weave space.
She's talking about the examples that you gave between and I think this is valid for any curatorial project, really.
I think that perhaps most people, or even I myself, we are so used to seeing the grid on things, the abstract, geometric, horizontal, vertical, very hard edge, cold lines, that to move yourself to see the weave, you look at the weave and you think of the grid. But so what we were trying to propose is to actually do the opposite, no? So I think I guess maybe the grid is such a strong reference in people's mind that perhaps even when they see the weave, they think of the grid. So we were trying to undo that, no? Not sure if it answers the question, but...
Yeah, no, I think it's a very large challenge to not only think of models of exhibition, but also of model of museography. I mean, in this exhibition, we were trying, on the one hand, to think of museographical displays of the 1970s and 80s in Latin America. We looked a lot at the work of Lina Bobardi. So we created kind of wall spaces and we tried to open the museography of a sense of a landscape of intersecting works, so you could see the different things and relations between the works. But it's still complicated unless you have an installation that has been proposed by an artist where all this is dissolved and it can have a life of its own. Even, for example, when we think of a piece like The Epidermic Scape by Vera Chavez Barcelo, that is an incredibly powerful piece, this kind of accumulation, this kind of infinite differences of the skins of herself and other individual, then displays there, the grid there works actually as something that is disrupted by the organicity of the skin. So I feel that is interesting, this idea of the line and the grid, that one feed into each other. But it definitely is something that we need to be aware and think of these kind of models where we can move away from it. We had a question here in the center of the room, and then we have one here to the right, and then one in the back to the left. So we have 4.
Muchísimas gracias. Quería
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask something that well, it really initially would be for Patssi and for Graciela. And this has to do with the idea that radicality in your work from this era was very much framed within a collective subject. So there's a relationship between radical, revuelta, revolución, en muchos sentidos de esas palabras, and that never happens with an individual subject. So if you could maybe talk a little bit about that position. Estaba preguntando acerca de, para ti, para Graciela, el trabajo de los artistas que sucede cuando están trabajando colectivamente, lo que puede tomar lugar en la colectividad.
Creo que para nosotros en ese momento,
at that moment, or for me, the group really was the space that I got my education. I went to an art school in the university, but for me, the group was the place where I got my real education. And so at that time, I didn't think of it, I didn't conceive of it as possible, or maybe, I don't know, I didn't think that the group itself was necessary to construct collective identity, but even when we continued to create works on an individual level, we made individual works, but this was within a frame of cycles of experimental art that we organized around ideas of creating our own spaces and giving ourselves the possibility, providing ourselves with the possibility of writing about our own works, or creating our own publicity, or attempting to have other spaces that wouldn't be galleries or museums that we felt at that time had really were only accessible to a certain type or a certain class, a certain level of society. So the group that the group is connected to the individual, and after the show Tucumán Arde and a number of other small things that we did with some other folks from the group, basically the group dissolved in '69, a little bit after Tucumán Arde, Tucumán burns, and until '94, the group didn't produce any art or do anything in the art world, and that has to do with the shock that the dissolution of the group created, to no longer have this possibility for thinking together as a group. And also, I think it has to do with politics and with the regimes, state regimes that we experience, which in some way attempted or emphasized questions of individuality. I think that only understanding, knowledge, and art also, or artistic production, becomes possible, or only are able to flourish in collaboration, in collective work, working together. Even when we're talking about an individual work, but it's always in relation to a context and to all of the issues that are that related to everyday life. I can't think of any work in the artistic field as an individual endeavor. Es interesante.
No, I think a question was based on the idea of the work that the difference between the work of the individual versus the collective, and the importance of the collective experience.
Well, basically, when I met up with the 3 other artists, what we found we had in common were we were all concerned with the social and political climate in our neighborhood, and actually in high school is where we met. And I felt that as we joined forces and we had similar concerns, I felt as a group we were a lot more powerful, and we fed off each other. And I felt really good about I felt very alone. I grew up in East LA, and I felt very alone. There were no other artists that people always ask me, why were you with these three men, and how come you didn't collaborate with other women? Well, at the time, I didn't know any other women that were into art or into making art. So then I met these three men, and we had a lot in common. I felt we were going along the same path. And as a unit, I felt we were way more powerful. Individually, I continued to make my own personal work. But I just felt that as a group, we had more power and a stronger voice at the time.
So there's a question here to the right.
First of all, thank you all so much for doing this. It's really, really exciting to be here, and it's really exciting to see this show up at the Hammer. I have a question about collectivity also. I teach undergraduate students in art, and as you're probably aware, the majority of undergraduate art programs now are female. There's 60 to sometimes 90% women in undergraduate classes. And I ask them every semester what they consider to be radical. And I've been really surprised with the generation of millennials with their responses about radicality, and they seem to be resisting radicality. And what's been emerging in our conversations is that this generation seems to look at collectivity, or the collectivity and collaboration, say, of social media, as a pathway against radicality. Like, they don't strive to be isolationist or deviants or to reject the system, but rather they're striving to be in the system. They're looking for more likes. They're looking for more affirmation. In fact, they buy likes online. So I guess my question for you would be, as artists who have a history of radical practice, I have two questions. One is, were you aware of your radicality when you were first doing it? And secondly, what advice or requests or hopes would you have for young women artists and acts of radicality now?
Would you like to?
Yes. Well, I would suggest to try maybe. The thing is that social media is enormous, you know, and I have a lot of. I have a son. He's 22, and I have many nieces, and I'm finding that they are a great inspiration for me. You know, these young women. I know how to reach them through that social media, but I tell them that it's good to be on your own. I'm hoping that I, right now, am being a really good example for them, you know, to really reach out, to feel more what they are feeling inside and not become such a, I want to be liked person, you know, like, or I'm always searching for somebody to like me. No, well, it's just so difficult, you know, to get away from all of that. But I hope that through, and maybe through these exhibits, you know, you can touch these young women. In that show precisely that I am in Cali right now, it was just so amazing to be able to reach out to these young women, and they would all touch me, and we would all embrace each other. They felt that, I think that it's just so important to touch each other, you know, and to find that physical acceptance, you know, and maybe it is more about the collective, you know, getting together, but really getting together, really having conversations, because you can't have a conversation texting somebody. It's not the same, you know. It's a difficult moment.
Patssi, would you like to respond to the first question, which is if you were aware that you were being radical when you started working?
I know that I had that intense radical feeling in my heart. Maybe I didn't verbalize it, but I had a lot of, I was really, really fed up and pissed off and confused about what was going on around me. And so in my heart, I was definitely feeling radical. And I couldn't stay still. I had to get up and do and say, make art about it. And, but at the same time, which I find what I was thinking about right now, yet I was standing up and voicing or making art about what I was feeling. One part of me wanted to be accepted. One part of me wanted to be part of this of the system, or I wanted to be in a gallery and in a museum. That's why the OSCO group, when they sprayed the wall, we wanted to get in. We were pounding on that door, let us in, we're as valid as anyone else in there. And so, yeah, we wanted to be, I don't know, but me, I wanted to participate and be part of that bigger picture and not be separate, which I still feel we are as a Latina. I'm still, even, because my practice now as a painter, that's basically what I do now. And I still feel separate. My paintings still haven't been accepted into the museum system. So now I'm doing something else, but I'm still fighting the same battle, you know. And in a way, I really don't fight it. I just do what I need to do. But the goal would be to one day have those paintings accepted into the larger, the mainstream art world.
So we have time for a very brief question from someone that has been waiting for a while. And all the people that we don't reach up and during the lunch break, you can approach the speakers. And just going to the idea of reference for the younger generation, I feel that, you know, having strong female role models, or like, you know, the radical women, is actually important. People have persevered and have, you know, this incredibly complex system that they had to navigate, and all the pertinence of their, you know, their work even today. So I think there is this idea that, you know, you don't, you know, this path is not easy, and being a good artist does imply having something important to say.
Hola, muchas gracias por el.
Thank you very much for this panel and for everything you've had to say. My question, a comment is, in Graciela and Karen's interventions, I wanted to specifically ask Karen, the experience that you've mentioned of working in Colombia with your body, which is represented in your paintings, that you talked about how your lived experience. But I wanted to ask you, in relation to developing an understanding of all of the wonderful, wonderful critical legacy that this exhibition is leaving behind for us today. In Chile and in Argentina, there's a movement that's called Ni Una Menos, not one less, which also has spread to other countries in Latin America, which is the fight against femicide. And I was wondering, sort of starting from what you spoke about in relation to your work and your such a powerful narrative that you've experienced, I would say, of self-determination over your own body. But I was trying to imagine what happened outside the paintings. What was happening in Colombia to women's bodies at that moment in relation to your work? Is your work proposing liberation, self-determination on the part of women or for their own bodies? But I'm also imagining a Colombian context at that moment where there was a very strong revolution and a very strong repression against women's bodies. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of behind the scenes, what was going on at that space in the same time frame that your work was being created. Yo puedo contestar en español.
Well, I was a foreigner in a way, no, in Colombia, but at the same time, you know, I was part of a group
I think, of course, there was a lot of repression of the woman. It was a total machista society, you know, and so I had a lot of male friends, not a lot of female friends, you know, when I first arrived to Colombia. I think probably because I felt so different than them, and because a lot of them maybe couldn't really understand how I thought, or they felt so different, or I felt so different, you know, because also just getting my own place when I moved away from home, was a really big deal. It was almost like a little scandal in the family, or even my girlfriends, the ones I had, were very surprised, or they thought that I was very courageous to want to live on my own. But for me, it was what I had to do, you know. There was a lot of control, of course, of women over them, their lives, by their husbands, or just society, you know. I think also in the art world, there were women artists, but of course there was always more male artists, even to this very day, you know, that are recognized more. But we did have some, you know, that were recognized, but just not a lot of new or younger ones, or the ones that did become well known was through different groups that were part of like a group where there were people that would do like a workshop that would do a lot of etching together, or graphics, or things like this. But it was very repressed for the women in that time. Yeah, so I felt kind of out of place a little bit.
I'm very sorry, but the time, we've already gone nearly 10 minutes over our time. So we have to stop here, but the speakers are around, so if you want to approach them. I know that there was another question in the room. I'm sorry that we didn't reach you. Thank you very much for being here.
Before everybody gets up to leave, sorry to cut into the applause, but I just wanted to catch everyone before they got up. I have a few announcements in regards to lunch and also the headsets. If you do have a headset, we do request that you keep it until the end of the day. You don't have to check it back in and then check it back out, so hold on to it, please. And in terms of lunch, I want to remind everyone that the box lunches are available in the courtyard for those who have pre-ordered and received a lunch ticket upon check-in. And if you have pre-ordered but did not receive your lunch ticket, go ahead and go back to the check-in table to get that, and that will be sorted for you. The lunch tickets will be collected in the courtyard near the lunch tables by a colleague wearing a black hammer jacket. And if you indicated that you had any dietary restrictions in advance, please see a Hammer staff member who has set aside them for you. If you're looking for a place to grab a quick lunch, there are several options nearby, including pizza at 800 degrees, vegetarian